The INTP is one of the most brilliant and curious personality types. They see patterns where others see noise. They question rules, break down systems, and imagine possibilities no one else considers. But every strength hides a weakness. For INTPs, the greatest danger isn't an outside force. Their biggest enemy lives in their mind, their habits, and even their relationships. In today's video, we'll break down the enemies INTPs face both inside themselves and in the world around them. From overthinking to emotional struggles, from productivity traps to their darker shadow side, we'll explore the battles that shape who they are. If you've ever wondered what holds INTPs back from reaching their full potential, or if you are an INTP trying to understand your own struggles, this is for you. INTPs live inside a mind that never stops. Their greatest enemy isn't the outside world. It's the battles happening in their own head. Let's break down their inner conflicts. First, overthinking and mental loops. The INTP brain is wired to question everything. They can see 10 different angles to a problem in seconds. What starts as a simple question can turn into hours of mental exploration. They might ask themselves, what if I do this? What if I don't? What if I'm wrong? Instead of finding answers, they spiral into more questions. This loop feels productive because they are thinking, analyzing, and exploring. But the truth is, nothing changes in the real world. They stay locked in endless thought experiments. Imagine wanting to write a book, but spending weeks thinking about whether the plot should start at chapter 1 or chapter 2. That is the INTP trap. They can think themselves into exhaustion without ever moving forward. Now, paralysis by analysis. INTPs hate making the wrong choice. They want to know every possible option before committing. The problem is, there are always more options. They might research for days, weeks, even months, and still feel like they don't know enough. This turns small decisions into impossible ones. Something as simple as buying a laptop becomes a research project. Choosing a career path feels like gambling with their future. Instead of acting, they keep collecting data, comparing possibilities, and waiting for the perfect clarity that never arrives. By the time they're ready to act, the opportunity may already be gone. What feels like intelligence is often fear disguised as preparation. The enemy here is indecision that freezes progress. Finally, fear of failure versus craving for mastery. INTPs want mastery more than recognition. They want to understand their craft, their subject, their passion at the deepest level. This makes them perfectionists in silence. They dream of creating something brilliant, but they fear starting and realizing they are not good enough. The thought of failing feels worse than not trying at all. This conflict keeps them trapped. They consume information endlessly, convincing themselves they're preparing, but they delay the moment of action. They tell themselves, I'll start when I know more, when I'm ready, when it's perfect. But mastery only comes through failure, through practice, through real-world trial and error. By avoiding failure, they also avoid growth. The irony is that the INTP has the mind to master almost anything they obsess over, but the fear of being judged as mediocre blocks them from showing their potential. They crave mastery but are chained by the possibility of not reaching it. For the INTP, the enemy is not ignorance, lack of skill, or outside pressure. Their true enemy lives inside. The mind that never stops thinking, the indecision that kills progress, and the fear of failure that keeps them from beginning. Until they learn to act in spite of uncertainty, their brilliance remains hidden. INTPs are often described as logical and detached, but beneath the surface they struggle with emotions more than they admit. Emotional struggles are another enemy they face, and these battles are often invisible to others. First, difficulty processing emotions. INTPs prefer logic. They rely on analysis, patterns, and rational explanations to make sense of the world. But emotions don't follow the rules of logic. When INTPs feel something intense, they often don't know what to do with it. Instead of sitting with the feeling, they step back and try to dissect it like a problem. They ask, why am I feeling this? What caused it? How do I make it go away? This creates distance. They analyze instead of experiencing, which makes their emotions build up in the background. Friends or partners might think they're cold, when in reality, the INTP is overwhelmed by feelings they can't translate into words. The enemy here is the gap between their logical nature and the chaotic world of emotion. Next, suppressed feelings, leading to explosions. Because INTPs struggle to express emotions in real time, they often push them down. They might convince themselves, it's not a big deal, or I'll think about it later. But emotions don't disappear. They pile up, like pressure building inside a container. Over time, one small trigger can release all that hidden frustration at once. This is when the calm, collected INTP suddenly snaps. It confuses people around them because it seems out of character. To the INTP, it feels like they lost control of something they thought they had under wraps. Suppressing emotions feels safer than dealing with them, but it creates even bigger problems in relationships, work, and so. Their enemy here is the illusion of control that hides a storm beneath the surface. Finally, fear of vulnerability and intimacy. INTPs want deep connections, but vulnerability terrifies them. To open up means exposing the parts of themselves they can't rationalize or control. Sharing feelings makes them feel naked, and they worry about being misunderstood or judged. Instead of showing what they feel, they withdraw. They hide behind logic, sarcasm, or silence. They might even test people subtly, revealing small pieces of themselves to see how others react. If they sense rejection or misunderstanding, they retreat completely. This fear of vulnerability creates loneliness. They want intimacy, but push it away at the same time. They want someone to understand them, but rarely let people see the full picture. The result is relationships that stay on the surface, leaving the INTP feeling isolated even when surrounded by others. Their enemy here is the fear that true connection will expose their weaknesses. For the INTP, emotional struggles are not about lacking feelings. They feel deeply, often more than they show. The problem is knowing how to handle those feelings without burying them or running away. Until they learn to face their emotions with honesty instead of logic, they remain trapped in cycles of suppression, isolation, and sudden outbursts. The inner mind of the INTP is brilliant, but their heart is often misunderstood, even by themselves. INTPs are independent thinkers, and their social life often reflects that. Their biggest social enemy isn't always other people. It's the constant friction between how they think and how the world communicates. First, their misunderstood communication style. When an INTP speaks, they often sound abstract or overly technical. They love precision, and they love exploring complex ideas. To them, conversations are about trading knowledge and testing perspectives. But most people don't communicate that way. Instead, they focus on emotions, storytelling, or quick book-and-forth exchanges. This mismatch makes INTPs seem detached, blunt, or even condescending, even if they don't mean to be. They might go on long explanations about something they find fascinating, while the listener tunes out. Or they might say something logically accurate, but emotionally tone-deaf, not realizing how it comes across. The INTP often leaves conversations frustrated, wondering why people don't get it, while others leave feeling disconnected. The enemy here is not their intelligence, but the gap between their style and what people expect in everyday communication. Next, struggles with small talk and social norms. Small talk feels pointless to an NTP. Asking about the weather or repeating surface-level phrases drains them. They crave meaningful discussions, deep questions, and intellectual stimulation. The problem is that society runs on small talk. It's the social glue that creates comfort and trust. Beskipnet, INTPs unintentionally skip the bonding stage with others. They might come across as awkward, distant, or uninterested. When they avoid these casual exchanges, in truth, they're not cold, they're bored by the ritual. But without small talk, building relationships becomes harder. The INTP feels alienated in environments where everyone else follows rules of politeness that don't make sense to them. The enemy here is the social script that feels unnatural, but is expected everywhere. Finally, isolation and avoidance of groups. INTPs value independence, and they need time alone to recharge. Solitude is where they think, create, and explore their interests without interruption. But this habit can slide into isolation. When group settings feel overwhelming or fake, they avoid them. When social obligations feel repetitive, they disappear. Over time, this avoidance turns into loneliness. The INTP may convince themselves they don't need anyone, but deep down, they crave understanding and connection. By isolating themselves, they create the very thing they fear most: being invisible or misunderstood. They want a circle of people who value them, but their patterns of withdrawal make it difficult to maintain relationships. The enemy here is not solitude itself, but the trap of turning solitude into a permanent escape. For the INTP, social challenges are a constant balancing act. Their unique mind makes them insightful, but also difficult for others to follow. Their dislike of small talk cuts them off from everyday bonding. Their need for independence often pushes them toward isolation. Until they learn how to bridge these gaps, they risk living on the outside, watching connections pass them by. The social enemy of the INTP is not people. It is the tension between their inner world and the social rules they feel forced to follow. INTPs are natural idea machines. Their creativity and curiosity are unmatched. But when it comes to productivity, their greatest enemy is themselves. The traps they fall into are not about laziness, but about how their mind works. First, procrastination and distraction. An INTP can spend hours researching a new theory, reading articles, or watching videos on a subject that sparks their interest. They'll go from one link to another, chasing connections and patterns. To them, it feels like learning. But what often happens is they lose focus on the original task. They meant to finish a paper, prepare for work, or complete a project, but instead they end up wandering down intellectual rabbit holes. Procrastination for an INTP doesn't always look like scrolling social media. It often looks productive studying, researching, analyzing its misdirected energy. Instead of finishing something concrete, they spend their time expanding their knowledge in every direction. The enemy here is the mind's tendency to chase stimulation instead of sticking to the one task that matters in the moment. Next, starting projects but not finishing. INTPs love beginnings. The spark of a new idea excites them more than anything. They'll start writing a book, designing a game, or learning a new skill. In the beginning, motivation is high because everything feels fresh and full of possibility. But once the initial excitement fades, reality sets in. Now it requires discipline, consistency, and structure, things that drain the INTP. At this point, they often abandon the project and jump to the next shiny idea. This leaves behind a trail of half-finished notebooks, abandoned files, and incomplete plans. To the INTP, these failures feel discouraging. But they also justify the cycle. I'll finish something when the right project comes along. But in truth, no project ever feels complete, because the thrill lies in starting, not finishing. The enemy here is the loss of momentum after the honeymoon phase of creativity. Finally, obsession with ideas over execution. For an INTP, the idea itself is often more exciting than the outcome. They love the theoretical stage, the brainstorming, the mapping, the mental exploration. Execution feels boring by comparison. Sitting down to do the repetitive work, facing imperfections, and pushing through obstacles doesn't match the high of thinking about the possibilities. This leads to a gap between potential and reality. An INTP might have groundbreaking ideas, but never turn them into something tangible. Others don't see the brilliance in their mind because it never leaves their head. This becomes a cycle. They overvalue the purity of the idea and undervalue the messy, imperfect work of bringing it to life. The enemy here is the comfort of imagination that prevents real-world impact. For INTP, productivity traps are subtle but destructive. They're not unmotivated. They're overflowing with potential, but procrastination, unfinished projects, and obsession with theory stop them from showing their full power. The hardest lesson for the INTP is learning that execution matters as much as ideas. Without action, brilliance stays hidden. Their productivity enemy isn't a lack of talent. It's the discipline to turn flashes of inspiration into finished results. While many of the INTP's battles are internal, they also face external enemies. These are forces in the outside world that clash with their natural way of thinking. Unlike their inner struggles, these enemies come from people, systems, and environments that block their independence and creativity. First, rigid authority and rules. INTPs dislike authority for authority's sake. They respect competence, logic, and fairness, but they push back when rules feel arbitrary or pointless. A strict boss who says, "Do it this way because I said so," becomes an instant enemy in the mind of an INTP. They question authority figures who refuse to explain their reasoning. This creates tension in structured environments like school or corporate jobs, where obedience is often valued more than innovation. An INTP forced to follow rules without reason feels trapped. Their natural instinct is to test boundaries, look for loopholes, or challenge the system outright. The enemy here is rigid authority that shuts down critical thinking. Next, environments that punish curiosity. Curiosity is the core of the INTP personality. They want to know how things work, why things exist, and what lies beyond the surface. But not all environments reward curiosity. Some see it as a distraction, a waste of time, or even a threat. A classroom that rewards memorization over exploration suffocates the INTP. A workplace that values routine over experimentation frustrates them. When their curiosity is punished, the INTP shuts down. They lose motivation, feel disconnected, and either withdraw or rebel. What looks like laziness or disengagement is often boredom with a system that doesn't challenge them. Their enemy here is an environment that sees questions as problems instead of opportunities. Finally, people who demand conformity. INTPs don't fit molds. They think differently, live differently, and often resist traditional expectations. But society values conformity. Families, schools, and workplaces often expect people to follow a set path. Study this, work here, live this way. When INTPs are pressured to conform, they feel suffocated. People who insist on tradition or uniformity become natural enemies to the INTP mindset. These are the co-workers who frown on unconventional ideas, the relatives who criticize them for not following the normal path, or the peers who pressure them to act like everyone else. For an INTP, conformity feels like death to their individuality. The enemy here is the demand to be someone they are not. For the INTP, external enemies are everywhere. In rigid, in closed-minded systems, and in people who want them to blend in. These forces clash with their independent, curious nature and push them into conflict. While they can adapt when necessary, the cost is high. Too much restriction turns their energy inward, leaving them frustrated, rebellious, or withdrawn. The external enemy of the INTP is not difficulty itself. They thrive on challenges. Their true enemy is any environment or authority that kills curiosity, punishes questions, or demands blind obedience. The INTP shadow side is a dangerous enemy. When their strengths are pushed too far, or when their frustrations build up, their personality can turn against itself. What makes them brilliant can also make them destructive. First, becoming detached and cold. At their best, INTPs are curious, imaginative, and flexible, but when stressed or hurt, they retreat into detachment. Instead of engaging with people, they disconnect. They view relationships through the lens of logic only, stripping away empathy. Someone close to them may share pain or vulnerability, but the INTP responds with cold rationality, almost like analyzing a case study instead of offering comfort. This detachment protects them from emotional overwhelm, but it also isolates them. Over time, they risk being seen as distant, uncaring, or robotic. The enemy here is not logic itself, but the overuse of logic as a shield against the messy human side of life. Next, using intellect as a weapon. The INTP mind is sharp, fast, and capable of seeing flaws in arguments instantly. When balanced said, this makes them excellent problem solvers. But in their shadow, this ability becomes a weapon. They might use sarcasm, brutal logic, or relentless questioning to tear people down. Instead of discussing ideas to learn, they argue to dominate. Friends or partners may feel belittled because the INTP always wins with intellect, even in situations where compassion matters more than being right. This can turn relationships toxic, leaving others resentful and the INTP misunderstood. The enemy here is pride in intellect, where winning an argument matters more than connection. Finally, falling into nihilism. INTPs spend so much time analyzing the world that they sometimes reach dark conclusions. They see contradictions everywhere, flaws in every system, and limitations in every belief. When their optimism fades, they risk sliding into nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. They may question whether goals are worth pursuing, whether morality has meaning, or whether life has purpose at all. This outlook drains motivation. Projects feel pointless, relationships feel temporary, and the world feels empty. The same mind that once brimmed with curiosity now finds only dead ends. Some INTPs escape into distractions, others into isolation, and some even into self-destructive habits. The enemy here is the collapse of meaning under the weight of their own analysis. The shadow side of the INTP is not their true self, but it lurks beneath the surface. Detachment, weaponized intellect, and nihilism are all extremes of their natural strengths. Logic without balance becomes coldness. Intelligence without humility becomes cruelty. Curiosity without hope becomes despair. The INTP's greatest defense against their shadow is awareness. By recognizing when they're slipping into detachment, arrogance, or nihilism, they can pull themselves back. But when ignored, the shadow side can turn their brilliance into self-destruction. The biggest enemy of the INTP isn't one single thing. It's a combination of inner conflicts, emotional struggles, social challenges, productivity traps, external pressures, and their own shadow side. Each of these battles reflects the same truth: the INTP mind is both a gift and a burden. Overthinking, suppressed emotions, and unfinished projects can keep them stuck. Rigid systems and conformity can make them withdraw, and when their shadow takes over, their brilliance can turn destructive. But awareness is the turning point. When INTPs recognize these enemies, they gain the power to face them. Their independence, curiosity, and sharp mind give them every tool they need to grow past these traps. The INTP doesn't need to defeat their mind. They need to work with it. And once they do, their biggest enemy becomes their greatest strength.